fish. Here we go. My drag is set a little bit too light. 2 feet of water, people. When you catch and release a trout, how likely is the fish to survive the encounter? How long can you hold a trout out of the water without accidentally killing it? Does exposure to below freezing air temperatures harm fish? Stay tuned for this video and I'll share some of the answers I've found to these important but tricky questions. If you like this video, there are 2 important things you can do to support our channel. First, you can subscribe by clicking the button below this video, and second, take a look at the information we included in the video description. Right off the bat, I want to say that I have no problem with people choosing to keep their legal limit of fish in order to put food on the table. Rules, regulations, and catch and keep limits are in place for good reason. But this video is for those who have or whoever will catch and then release a trout, which at some point will probably be all of us. Let me also point out that all you have to do is watch through some of my earlier videos and you'll see that I'm not perfect at good catch and release techniques, but I really do try to improve as I learn more information about the survival rates of the fish that I catch and release. Unfortunately, fishing on ice adds another layer of complexity to catch and release fishing. Usually when you're ice fishing, the trout is yanked out of the hole and rolled around in the snow for several seconds before it's held up and sometimes dropped, while we start digging through our gear and our pockets for a smartphone so we can get a picture. And then, sometimes minutes later, and after exposing the trout to freezing temperatures, we film ourselves in slow motion heroically releasing the trout that we think will live to see another day. Of course, not everyone fishes this way, but you don't need to look very far on social media to see some really rough fish handling. I once read a study by Ferguson and Tufts, which was done in the 90s. In this study, the researchers observed the impact that air exposure had on trout that had been exercised and then released. The first sample of fish were exercised and then released without being held out of the water. These fish had a survival rate of around 90%. The next group of fish were exercised, held out of the water for 30 seconds, and then released. Surprisingly, this group of trout had a survival rate of only 62%. The final group of trout were exercised, held out of the water for 60 seconds, and then released. The group that was held out of the water for 60 seconds had a survival rate of just 28%. You can find a link to the article where I read about this study in the description below this video. Other studies like this one have found similar survival rates in trout. Some studies have also recorded survival rates above 90%. These fish were handled correctly, kept in the water, and caught with smaller barbless hooks. As much as we'd like to think that every fish that swims away is going to survive, that just doesn't seem to be the case. If an angler catches and releases 50 trout in a day, he or she could unintentionally be killing more fish than the angler who simply catches and keeps his or her limit. But of course, this all depends on proper fish handling. And research shows that the angler can do a lot to increase the survival rates of the trout they release. As I said before, proper fish handling gets a little more challenging when you're ice fishing. Really, the only way to land the fish is to take it out of the water for at least a short period of time. The good news is that there's a few simple things we can do to dramatically increase the survival rate of the trout we release, even while ice fishing. I'd recommend applying these tips for handling most species of fish, but in this video, we're talking specifically about increasing the survival rates of trout. Tip number 1 is to make the fight as short as possible. One of the many reasons I love fishing in shallow water is that you can land a fish very quickly. When there's only a few feet between the depth you hooked the fish and the ice on the surface, this makes for a short and exciting fight and keeps the fish from building up too much lactic acid during the fight. Tip number 2, and I think this one is the most important. As soon as you land the fish, get it back in the water within about 10 seconds, if you can. You might need more than 10 seconds to remove the hook and release the fish. So what I like to do is bring a deep, rubber-coated mesh net with me when I ice fish. As soon as I land a fish, I've started sticking the bag of my net through the ice and into the water. Then I quickly and gently put the trout back into the hole, but inside the net, keeping at least its head and gills underwater. Some people also use a clam fish well, which can be kept in the ice hole and suspended in the water. There's a link to this product in the description below this video. Once the fish is safely in the net, I'll remove the hook and sometimes take a quick picture or video. And the key here is to not take the trout out of the water for more than 10 seconds at a time. According to a recent Facebook post by the Utah DWR, trout's gills can freeze pretty quickly when exposed to freezing air temperatures. So that 10-second rule might be even more important while ice fishing than it is when fishing in mild temperatures. It also helps if the whole process of landing and releasing the fish is under 1 minute. Tip number 3, trout have a layer of slime on their bodies that protect them from possible infections. Whenever I'm fishing for trout, my goal is to remove as little of that slime as possible, so I avoid dragging the fish against the snow or the ice too much, and especially any dry surfaces. Dry hands or gloves stick to that slime and remove quite a bit of that layer from the trout's skin. The best thing to do is take off your gloves and wet your hands before handling the trout. Tip number 4, if you do hold the fish, make sure to cradle it gently and close to the ground. Try and fight the instinct to squeeze the fish, as it can cause internal damage, and in my experience, squeezing the fish just makes it flop around more. Of course, these aren't the only tips that can help increase the survival rate of the trout you catch and release, but I think they're the most relevant for ice fishing. If you'd like to learn more about how to properly catch and release trout, you can watch our video titled, How to Catch and Release Trout Without Accidentally Killing Them. Like I said earlier in the video, I don't think there's anything wrong with keeping fish, but I do think if we plan to release a fish, it makes a lot of sense to know what to do to give that trout the best chance of survival.